This is on. Does everybody have a handout? Who has them? Nancy? She has some. Is everything okay now? Good? Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here. Who is here for the first time this semester? Okay. Well, thank you for being here. We have been talking about the reality of adoration. As you know, the Conference of Bishops in the United States has been inviting the whole American church into Eucharistic revival. The mic? Oh my gosh. Are the kids of the kingdom here too? Thank you. Thank you, Chrissy. So, in the Eucharistic revival, the bishops want us to go back to the Eucharist after the pandemic. We have been all a little bit disoriented, understanding what the Mass is about. And a lot of people they were on the fence, and so they stopped coming to Mass. A lot of people have not made it back since the pandemic, which tells you that faith and religion based on mere traditions is not going to be a very strong, is not going to endure the strong argument of secularism in today's world. So the bishops are inviting us to go and cultivate a life of prayer and meditation, having the Eucharist at the center of everything. So the first talk that I gave was on the prophet Elijah, going back to the Bible and understanding what adoration is in the existential transformation of the prophet being called by God in the midst of a drought in the whole nation of Israel, and how he is trying to confront idolatry and be able to land in this pure contemplation of the true God, who doesn't have names or just mere attributes, but the God who is who he is, according to what we heard in the book of Exodus, in the vision, the theophany of Moses in the burning bush. And we continue with Elijah, who was a great influence not only in the Jewish tradition, in the prophetic movement, but also in the era of Christian spirituality. As you all know, that in the 12th century, the foundation of the Carmelite order in Mount Carmel in Israel was inspired both by the contemplative actions of the Blessed Mother and also the prophet Elijah. So that's the reason why the second talk was on St. Teresa of Avila. St. Teresa was a Carmelite from the 16th century, the first woman doctor of the church, who taught us about how the human soul can be transformed in the reality of prayer. So in prayer, everything that needs to be confronted in us is confronted by the sweet yoke of God's grace that comes into our lives and imposes himself until we are able to experience the freedom that God promises to all of us. So now we're going to continue with a saint that probably you do not know much about. He was canonized last year on May 15th by Pope Francis in Rome, and his name is Jacques de Foucauld. And Jacques de Foucauld, we will learn about his life and what Jacques de Foucauld was all about, and help us understand the reality of the desert. And I know that you probably couldn't actually figure it out, because when we were inviting people, many of the lectures at Mass would say, Father is going to be talking about blah, 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 blah. They couldn't pronounce Foucault. But it's a kind of a... I was laughing in the back of the church every single time somebody attempted to read his name. So, but he's a powerful saint, and that we can learn so much from, and who can help us understand how adoration is not something that is supposed to happen in the context of the chapel, within the constraints of the four walls of a chapel or a church, but this is a school where we learn how to adore the Lord and how we can carry with us that attitude of prayer and contemplation in everything that we do, in our ordinary life. So what we're doing there is that actually we're being schooled on how to live. And that's the most important thing. Normally, I bring you a biblical passage to do our guided meditation, but today I'm going to propose to you a prayer that has been written, composed by Jacques Foucauld, and that if you Google his name, this is the first prayer that is going to come out because it's a very influential prayer of abandonment. And then, but before we do that, I'm going to invite you to please sit back and relax and take a deep breath. The good Lord has brought you here. God has invited you into His presence. Be aware of everything that is going on. Are you cold? Are you warm? Are you uncomfortable? Are you anxious or sad or joyful? Are you burdened by the need to be here? Or are you hopeful that the good Lord will speak to your heart in a powerful way? Take a deep breath. And I want you to think about something that happened in your life this week. A conversation, an interaction, a place that you visited, a challenge that you faced. And think about in which ways do you think God was making Himself present to you? Take a deep breath. And slowly I'm going to ask you to open your eyes and go to the handout, to the part that says on the top, Guided Meditation. And you are going to slowly read this prayer by Jacques de Foucauld. Remember, be repetitive. Read it as many times as you need to. Be attentive and be selective. Choose that word or phrase that captures your attention in a special way. Does anybody want to share the word?
Do with me what you will.
Thank you.
Into your hands.
Thank you.
Do with me what you will.
Thank you.
I accept all.
What's that?
I accept all.
I accept all. And
With boundless confidence.
with boundless confidence.
Your will be done.
Your will be done.
I thank you.
I thank you.
Abandon.
Abandon. Beautiful.
Surrender.
Who said that?
Surrender.
Surrender. Yes?
I commend my soul.
I command my soul. That's beautiful.
I offer it to you with all my heart.
I offer it to you with all my heart.
I am ready,
I am ready.
and I accept all.
That's total freedom, isn't it? To be able to say that.
You are my Father.
You're my Father.
I love you, Lord.
I love you, Lord. Who is he echoing here?
The Lord's Prayer.
Yes. And in which specific context do you think he is echoing Jesus in this prayer?
On the cross.
On the cross. Jesus has his arms outstretched, offering himself in sacrifice to the Father in total surrender and abandonment. Father, I abandon myself into your hands. Into your hands I commend my spirit. Do what you will. Whatever you may do, I thank you. That's total freedom, isn't it? We did a spirituality series here on holy indifference. Give me life or give me death. Whatever it is that you give me, I take, I accept all. Having a disposition to accept whatever the Lord wants to give us is only something that we can do when we have embraced the freedom that Christ offers to all of us. Let only your will be done in me and in all your creatures. I wish no more than this, O Lord. Into your hands I commend my soul. He's echoing the words of Jesus on the cross. Without reserve, without and with boundless confidence, for you are my Father. So what kind of sentiment or feeling or thought is going on to the heart and mind of Jacques de Foucauld when he wrote this? What do you think it is?
He's at peace.
He's at peace.
He's at peace because he doesn't have to worry anything the Lord provides.
That's powerful.
Total abandonment.
Total abandonment.
I see beauty in pain.
He's finding beauty and goodness and truth in his own pain. Anybody else? Because normally we tend to reject those sort of things. Yes, Alice?
Like, I need to surrender. It's like he has to do this as though he has to breathe. There's no choice in it.
He's embracing the unavoidable. And because he's embracing the unavoidable, he's been made free. He's been set free by embracing the unavoidable. Anybody else?
Love.
Huh?
Love.
Yes. Total love, pure love. Pure love. Those who have been coming to my spirituality series for the last years, what is the faculty of the soul that allows you to love? I thought about that many times. Does anybody remember? The will. So the Gospel tells us there are three major faculties in the soul. And the three powers of the soul are the intellect, the memory, and the will. The will is the part of the soul that allows us to love. But what happens when our will is compromised? We do not want what God wills. We only want what we will. And this abandonment allows us to truly understand the power of God. Let's go back and let's say together, Father, I abandon myself into your hands. Do with me what you will. Whatever you may do, I thank you. I am ready for all. I accept all. Let only your will be done in me and in your creatures. I wish no more than this, O Lord. Into your hands I commend my soul. I offer it to you with all the love of my heart. For I love you, Lord, and so need to give myself, to surrender myself into your hands without reserve and with boundless confidence, for you are my Father. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. I hope that you keep this prayer with you. And when you are facing moments of uncertainty or moments when you are having a hard time understanding God's will for you and resisting God's will in your own life, go back to this prayer and find courage in the words of Charles de Foucauld that he's actually echoing the Lord Jesus when he was offering himself to the Father at the garden, when he was being judged, when he was being killed, when he was going through his own passion. So I hope that when you feel in those moments, go back to this prayer and befriend Jacques de Foucauld and ask. We believe in the communion of saints. We believe that there is this wonderful community of saints where we are part of. We believe in the church triumphant, in the church in purgatory, and the church militant. We all believe that we are supporting one another on a journey back to heaven. So embrace these words of the prayer of abandonment by Jacques de Foucauld, especially in those moments, and you will experience freedom in your own heart to accept the things that you cannot change, to accept the unavoidable, to accept the things that are going to happen, and minimize the suffering of having to resist something that is beyond our own control and our own capacity. So we're going to learn a little bit about the life of Jacques de Foucauld, and I'm going to call this the life of Jacques de Foucauld as a sermon. And one of the things that you find in biblical literature and in hagiography or the life of the saints is that sometimes you see that God is manifesting in the life of the person and preaching to all of us through the life of that person. And then that's the reason why they become a living testimony. Do you remember what happened to Jeremiah? When God asked him, like in his own imprisonment, he was able to reflect the moral and the religious imprisonment of the people of Israel at the time, and how overcoming the darkness of being imprisoned, helping understand the liberation that God was going to bring to Israel. The prophet Hosea that you find in the Old Testament sounds a little radical, but God asked him to go and marry somebody who traded love. There are two children here. You know what I mean. And then what happened there, he wanted to signify how Israel was going around and tried to marry other gods around the Semitic region. And then Hosea goes and married Gomer, who had that for a business, and he said, in the same way, I am going to marry you. God is marrying Israel regardless of the sins that they have committed in the past. And there is a beautiful passage in the prophet Hosea that says, I'm going to take her to the desert and I will speak to her heart. I'm going to heal her by speaking tenderly to her heart. And that's the love of God, that no matter what we have done, no matter our past, no matter the things that we go through, God still wants to come down and be in communion with all of us. So you see how the life of the prophet becomes a sermon in itself. So Jacques de Foucauld was born on September 15th, 1858, in the midst of the 19th century. As you know, it is a very complicated era. The American colonies are getting their independence. So most of them, the power of France and England and Spain and everything else is lost. Napoleon and the French Revolution and all the things are happening here. And this is a French man who comes from the nobility. And a person who has some kind of power, but as you know, the French Revolution tried to kill what is called the Ancien Régime, and that is the monarchy and also the church. And Napoleon has imposed himself as the emperor, and he has conquering and invading countries and so on. And then France is in this great revolution in the at the beginning of the 19th century. We have the we have the Industrial Revolution. We have the cultural movement of Romanticism, and many other things are happening in the 19th century. And France now wants also to expand its colonialism, and is going into Africa, and is going into some other countries, trying to impose their own colonial policies. And they're trying to get into Northern Africa. And that's where you see that there is an adventure and a spirit of adventure and conquest among the French. And this is a Frenchman who became orphan and now is being raised by his grandparents. And the grandparents are trying to give him an education. Jacques de Foucauld grew up in this nobility. But when he was 6 years old, he became an orphan. And he was educated lovingly by his grandparents. His grandparents loved this kid, embraced him, and educated him. And he learned the Catholic faith and received the sacraments. He attended the Jesuit school of St. Genevieve in preparation to enter the military academy. He wanted to pursue a career in the military. And he was expelled from this academy, from the Jesuit academy, in 1876 for being lazy and undisciplined. There were 87 students in the class, and he ended 87. So the man did not apply himself, and because he came from a life of excess, where he has different servants and who were tending to his own needs, this man had no discipline, no sense of self-control, no sense of self-possession. And then he abandoned all religious practice at this time. And then he entered the Saint-Cyr military school and inherited a big fortune from his grandparents. Now he has money in excess. Now it's not only a very, not only he has a can-do attitude, now he has money, and he has the capacity, and he has the indiscretions of youth. And then he is going into the military when it is all about learning how aggression can be built in the human heart, and the spirit of conquest that the French wanted to expand in Northern Africa, in Morocco, and Algeria, and Tunisia, and many of these countries. So this man is growing in this context of his military school. And he lived an extravagant life of food. He would eat everything on the table, to the point that he wouldn't care if other people on the table didn't eat. He had a voracious hunger. He was a glutton. He liked to drink, and he liked to engage in romance with different people at the same time, in different ways. So he had a very active life. I had to use euphemisms here, so you had to. They're going to test my mastery of the English language, which is already very deficient. And he entered military life, and he traveled to Morocco and Sahara and Palestine. He returned to Paris and to live a dissipated life. One of the things that he did is that he applied himself and developed a passion for geography and the culture of Morocco and Algeria. So, and this is going to be extremely important, because as I'm talking about the life of the saint as a sermon that God uses to preach to all of us, all these details about the life of Jacques de Foucauld are going to be important in order to understand his own spirituality. So he is a man who has a lot of money. He's a glutton, likes to eat and drink and fool around. And then now he has a lot of money, and then he's sent to Northern Africa, and he was going with a friend, a girlfriend there, and then who her name I think is Mimi, and she tried to also pretend to be from the nobility, but she wasn't, and he wanted to travel with her so he can have company there. And then and he was there, he realized that if the only way I can present myself and do what I want here is to pretend to be somebody else. So he pretended to be a rabbi, a Jewish rabbi, and then went around because people had some ideas about the French, and people had some resistance to the French at the time, and I think they still do. They're not the only ones. But he found a way of traveling to Algeria and Morocco. And then he was fascinated by the geography of these beautiful countries in the northern part of Africa. Does anybody know what kind of famous saint came from Algeria? Does anybody know? St. Augustine. Hippo. That was the city where St. Augustine was the bishop. And he came from northern Africa. And Hippo is right now in what is called Algeria. And it's going to be extremely important detail in the spiritual influences of Jacques de Foucauld. So he's fascinated by this geography, and he is embracing and observing the exuberant geographical phenomena that he's contemplating, and then he goes into writing a book on the geography of Morocco and Algeria, and he becomes very famous. But you all know that the reason why this book became popular in France is because now the French have a handbook that they can use in their conquest of those lands. Make sense? Because he is a military. And as a military explorer, what he's providing is some kind of insight into the terrain that the French not only have to conquer, but also have to maintain. Because they're going to be rebels all over. And then he is now applying himself. It's not that he is lazy and undisciplined or doesn't have the capacity to produce and do something constructive. It's just that he is, right at that point in his life, he was so disoriented, and the military training gave him some sort of discipline and exposed him to the fascination of this geographical area. He returned to Paris and lived a dissipated life still, and he applied himself and developed a passion for geography and culture of Morocco and Algeria. He rediscovered his faith and entered a Trappist monastery in 1890 and was sent to another monastery in the Syria-Turkey border. Now, how did this happen? How is it possible that a man who lived such a dissipated life, an extravagant life, who goes into the military, develops some kind of affinity towards geography and everything else, now is returning to the faith? So he went to a monastery in Paris, the monastery of St. Augustine. And then there in the monastery of St. Augustine, he had a conversation with the abbot about that, and he said, why are you so happy here? And now, if you understand the history of the Benedictine order, the Benedictine order was founded by Benedict in the 6th century, as you know. And he wrote the Rule of St. Benedict. But then there was a great reformation of the Benedictine order in Cluny that was a little too extravagant. Remember the two pillars of the Benedictine order, prayer and work. In Cluny, that was one of the greatest abbeys of all times and was a cultural center of medieval Europe. There were monks who were illiterate and said, because you cannot read, the only thing that you're going to do is to work. And those who can read, you can pray only. So now you are actually killing the equilibrium, the spiritual balance that Benedict intended in that order. And now that's the reason why the distortion of the vision that Benedict had brought Cluny to an end, and there were other political and societal forces and factors that influenced with the decline of Cluny. But there were then movements that trying to go back to a stricter observation of the Benedictine rule. And that's where you have the Cistercians. And the Cistercians with Stephen Harding, and one of the greatest Cistercians that we have is in Bernard of Clairvaux. But then there were people who thought that the Cistercians were not strict enough. And then they founded the Trappists. And the Trappists are called Order of St. Benedict of the Strict Observance. Now, Jacques de Foucauld went to have a conversation with a Trappist abbot, a Benedictine of the Strict Observance. And now he was able to go to confession after so many years without going to confession. And then he was fascinated by the life of St. Augustine, who came from where? From Algeria. And now he is at the monastery of whom? Of St. Augustine in Paris. And then all these spiritual influences started changing something in him. So the man goes from a very radical life in vice and sin to a very radical life in the pursuit of virtue and holiness to an extreme. To the point that even Jacques de Foucauld thinks that the Trappist monks were not strict enough. He wanted radical poverty. And at that time, remember, the Trappists don't eat eggs and chicken and meat and the cheese has to be in a certain way. The vegetables that they ate were not supposed to be cooked. And then the Vatican forced them to start cooking their vegetables with butter. And then he said, how is this possible? This is just a distortion of our own strict observance of the rule. And this man went from being here all the way here. He is just trying to balance himself by going from one extreme to the other, which happens also in radical conversions, which happens in all of us, that sometimes we try to overcompensate and go to the other side of the spectrum in order to feel that we are still maintaining some sense of control. So that happened to him. So he was sent to another monastery on the border of Syria and Turkey. And then he thought that they were like, how there's so many poor people here. I cannot live in the comfort of this monastery when I see all these sort of things that are happening. I want to live a stricter life. And then he moved to Nazareth. And in Nazareth, he became a porter at the Claris convent, St. Clare's sisters. And he was a porter. He wanted to be a quiet, very kind of an entry-level job in a monastery where he could just live in prayer in humility. Now we have this man who came from the nobility, who has a lot of money, who has a lot of excesses in his life. Now he is trying to choose a very radical life of poverty. He returned to France to be ordained in 1901. He was in his early 40s, about my age at the time when he was ordained. He went to Algeria then to live as a hermit among the Tuareg people. So in Nazareth, he was fascinated not with the public life of Jesus and his ministry. He was fascinated and meditating on the life of Jesus within the context of the Holy Family. The ordinary life of Jesus, the domestic life of Jesus, that gave him the character and the persona that make him go and gain souls for God in his active ministry. So he was contemplating the contemplation of St. Joseph, the example of St. Joseph. He was contemplating the beauty and the virtues of the Blessed Virgin Mary and the ordinary life. And then he would use his imagination to picture the life of Mary, Jesus, and Joseph in Nazareth. And then he wanted to live in a Muslim country as a Christian. And then, like Jesus, trying to go down and learn the culture, learn the language, serve the locals, befriend them, and be a reflection of the life of Jesus among the Muslims. Now, who were the Christians in Algeria at the time? The French. And what were the French doing? They were conquering the country. They were manipulating the political system. They were controlling all the resources of Algeria and Morocco. So the Christians that we know are the ones who dress in military uniforms, and now they are here trying to take possession of our own land. But now he went there the first time as a military, but now he's going as a priest, as a monk, who wants to live a very solitary life, and allowed the geographical region that he contemplated to be a reflection of what he wanted to attain in his own soul. So he saw the vastness of the desert, and he wanted to rebuild the same vastness of that desert, that level of emptiness and solitude and silence within his own soul. So he wanted to recreate within himself what he was contemplating in the outside. And that's the reason why he went to the desert. And he was fascinated by it. You can Google the house where he lived, and it's a very interesting little hut right there in the desert with stones and so on. And the desert can be quite difficult to live in, as you know, not only during the day but during the night, and all the different political instabilities. He lived as a Christian among Muslims, living the same conditions of poverty as the locals. He learned the language and translated Tuareg poetry without moral censures. People would write little things in the language of the desert, and he will take that and translate that. He didn't make any moral judgment on what people were writing. He was just trying to truly understand the language of the people and the heart of the people and the mindset of the people, to the point that he published a 700-page dictionary on the Tuareg language. So many of the studies that they do in the language of the desert came to his own studies and of the Tuareg language. He used the top of the mountain to be in silence and adoration. So he will climb to the top of the mountains, and this is a very biblical scene, as you know. The top of the mountain in the biblical context is an intermediate place between heaven and earth. The top of the mountain is the place where to which man ascends, and is the place to which God descends. And then it is a middle point between heaven and earth. That's the reason why every powerful event in the Bible happens on the top of the mountain. The transfiguration happened at the top of the mountain. The sacrifice of the prophets of Baal happened at the top of the mountain, Mount Carmel. You see, for example, what happened when the law was given, Mount Sinai. You see the transfiguration, where did it happen? The crucifixion of Jesus happened in Mount Zion. So you see all these things happening on the top of the mountain, because geographically is a powerful image of this intermediate point between heaven and earth. So Jacques de Foucauld would go to the top of the mountain to find silence and to find that reassurance in the presence of God. Now, he was killed by a group of tribal raiders in 1916. So there were people who were looking for French people to kidnap, and they found him there, and they took him and they shot him in the head, and he was killed. But people remember him as a great saint, as a man of God, who, although Christian, who was a man who knew how to love his neighbor, and who was able to translate his deep contemplation of the presence of God into a radical charity, loving others, even if they didn't share the same religion. So what are the main lines that we can learn here from Jacques de Foucauld in his own spirituality? And is the burden of comfort. You think that comfort is something that you must retain and hold on to, but comfort can become a burden when all what you do is to seek out gratifications, when all what you do is to try to retain pleasure and avoid pain. It becomes a burden in itself, not only because it's not sustainable and realistic, it's because there is no possibility of growth if all what you do is to protect whatever comfort, whether it is existential, spiritual, emotional, financial, whatever that is that you are trying to retain. So he realized that having all of this is always going to create a deeper hunger in me that is never going to be satisfied. And he was only able to do that to find out the purpose of life when he has his own conversion and realized that gratification and pleasures and satisfactions are not the only things that are going to give you happiness in life. The other part is the extremes of pleasure. And the thing is, sometimes when you find some gratification and you start a process, you trigger a process that is never going to end because it's always going to be asking for more and more and more, and you think that you are going to obtain greater satisfaction, but what happens existentially is that you become aware of the deeper, an even deeper dissatisfaction in your own life. That's one of the things that he figured out. The other one is the transfiguration of purpose, and I'm using all these categories that sound like a very esoteric and theological, but bear with me. When I talk about the transfiguration of purpose, is that sometimes we do have a fixation on something. We want to pursue something. We're going to go after something. And then we realize that we have been channeling an exorbitant amount of energy towards something that is actually not good for us. That I've been obsessed and fixated on something that I really want, but I know that that energy is wasted energy because that I'm pursuing is not going to promote my own greatness, my excellence, and the glory of God. It's going to do the opposite. It's going to be a detriment to my own growth. And then what happens in him is there is a man who have a lot of energy. And he had energy to be just playing around and being lazy and being undisciplined. And he spent a lot of energy probably doing some things that were not constructive. But when he was able to rechannel that energy, that drive was able to take him to a whole different place. That's what I call the transfiguration of your purpose. Allowing God into your own life so you can learn how to reorient that flow of divine energy that has been given to you for a higher purpose. And that's what Jacques de Foucauld was experiencing here. The other thing is metanoia and a radical shift. Metanoia is a change of mind. Metanoia in Greek means an afterthought. Normally, metanoia is what the Old New Testament calls radical conversion or repentance. And there's two words, metanoia and epistrophein, change of mind and also change of attitude, to turn around to the other side. So we can actually see things through a whole different perspective. And that goes to a radical shift in your own personal life, not only morally, but existentially and spiritually and emotionally. Conversion is not only like, I used to believe this and I believe this. I used to be a Baptist and I'm a Catholic. Yes, that's conversion. That's some part of metanoia. But the true metanoia is when you actually embrace the divine order that God has established into your own life, and then you resist the temptation to distort the beautiful harmony that the Lord wants to recreate within your soul. The other part is the option for the poor. And then he realized that, hey, I can just live a life when I can just spend and try to satisfy whatever need I think I have, whatever need I create. But now he is opting in a preferential manner for the poor. He wants to be with the poor and live with the poor. And he wants to befriend the poor. The refusal of honor. And he soon realized that all these titles and all these nobilities and pomp that he was used to by growing up in this environment was not necessary. The other part is the ordinary as the stage of greatness. And that's the thing that's important, because when we come to pray to God, what God wants to do is to transform radically our own lives. He wants the time that we spend in prayer and adoration to be the school where we relearn how to perceive the presence of God in the midst of everything that we do. What Teresa of Avila said, that I mentioned that to you last time, they said, Even among the pots and pans in the kitchen, you can find God. If you have the right disposition in your heart, it doesn't matter where you are. So when you come to church, when you come to the chapel, when you come to the Eucharist, when you come to adoration, that time is an intentional time that is meant to open and refine your vision so you can contemplate the presence of God in other interactions, in other places, in other conversations, in the books that you read, in whatever it is that you're doing. And then that is the ordinary as a stage of greatness. So God is manifesting in very unique ways in the things that you have to do. The problem with spiritual life is that we compartmentalize. And we like to have no spiritual life, but we tend to search for spiritual experiences. And that's the reason why our spiritual life is so inconsistent. Because every time we go to church, every time we go to prayer, or every time we go to meditation, we do want to feel something. We want to levitate, I don't know, we want to have a vision, we want to have some catatonic state or do some automatic writing and have visions and locutions. No. If you seek out only spiritual experiences, your spirituality will be inconsistent because God is not going to play that game with you. What we want is a spiritual life. If a grace and a consolation is given to me, I gratefully receive it. But if I'm going through a moment of drought and aridity, and I know that my senses are prevented from perceiving the presence of God in my life, I know that I can still go in with the certainty and the reassurance that God is still there. And that's how my faith is being purified. Now, solitude and radical kenosis. Now, kenosis is a very beautiful word in Greek, used in the letter to the Philippians chapter 2 verse 5 when it says that Jesus Christ did not regard his divinity as something to be grasped, but he lowered himself. It's the self-emptying of Christ. Christ is emptying himself. He's embracing radical poverty, but it's not about just giving away all the money that you have and your 401k or whatever it is that you have, your stocks and everything. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about this radical emptiness, the self-emptying, which is called kenosis or kenosis in Greek, in the letter to the Philippians, talking about the self-emptying of Jesus Christ, who even though was God, he was willing to become a slave for you and for me, and to be subject to pain and mistreatment and all of it. And then Jacques de Foucauld found this, in solitude, he found this radical kenosis because he wanted to be one of the people that was with him. Charity as the driver for evangelization. Sometimes that's the problem that we have sometimes in today's world. That we think that the best way to win souls is to go and tell people what to do and what not to do. And we start the conversation through morality, and it doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't go anywhere. Because then we're going to talk about the things that are wrong, and the things that you're not doing, and the things that you should be doing, and so on. And then people build walls, and then become defensive, and then the conversation about God is gone. And that's the reason why there is something in theology called via pulchritudinis, the way of beauty. And the thing is, you have to start talking about beauty first. The beauty of God manifested in the human soul, that beautiful harmony of God. And then this will inspire the soul to go and search the truth, and the truth leads to right living. That's the reason why when we come to Mass, we talked about the right way to celebrate. And the right way to celebrate leads to the right way to believe. And the right way to believe leads us to the right way of living. Orthodoxy and orthopraxis. That's what it is. When we learn how to worship the Lord well, it influences the way we believe. And the way we believe influences the way we live our lives. So that's why adoration and worship and praise and what we do at Mass is extremely important for our own lives. And we need to understand the ramifications, the dimensions of being there. And then he found charity as the best port of entry for his interactions with other people. The other one is solidarity and sacrifice. And he was killed. And he was killed because he chose to live despite the risk and the danger among people that he wanted to love. And that happens sometimes. Sometimes you, in your own lives, you have to face the struggles and the difficulties of sacrifice because you want to stay close and committed to the people you love. Anyway, this is, in a nutshell, a little bit of the life of Jacques de Foucauld, a man who had the tendency to be radical, but was able to allow God to bring him to the center and to really focus on the contemplation. He was a man who was able to heal his own tendencies, extreme tendencies, and was able to find radical charity as the best way to stay in the middle. We're going to take some time for personal meditation, and I'm going to ask you to, it's beautiful outside, so you want to walk, go and walk. You want to go to the church, go to the church. You want to stay here, stay here. But there are 3 questions that I'm going to ask you. What natural tendencies in you require redemption and redirection? You know, what kind of radical things are you doing right now in your life and that needs to be redirected to the other side? So instead of using something in detriment of you, then use it in benefit of whatever God is doing in your life. What aspects of your life do you refuse to abandon in the Father's hands? I mean, he has been talking about abandonment.
Found this on the web.
Tell me about it. Yeah. This thing is possessed, to be honest with you.
Do you exercise it every day?
Excuse me?
Do you exercise it every day?
What?
The thing that's your watch.
I exercise it. I should. That's a really good. I probably should. Yes. Yes. Va de reto Satana. What keeps you from relating to the poor, the broken, and the needy? And I'm not talking about, I just give them money sometimes, I send a check. No, I'm talking about what keeps you from relating to the poor, the broken, and the needy. Because sometimes when we see the poor or somebody who's broken or too messed up, we try to, we find excuses and we find different ways. And it's like, no, I'm going to love you, but from here. I don't want to be too close. What keeps you from that? What kind of fears do you have when you have to do that? Who in your life should benefit more from your love and understanding? Who in your life should benefit more from your love and understanding? Okay? Let's take 20 minutes. At 10:30, we are going to have a break, and at 10:45, we'll be here. Thank you.